Well, hey, what's up, students? Join here with Noah and Betty again to bring you guys our high school small group devotion. We've come over to David Marcoux's house just to enjoy the beautiful scenery and be out here on the lake for just a little bit as we do our Bible study time. And with that, we're in this study series called The Center of the Universe, which really focuses on putting Jesus at the center of your life and these key components of how that really relates. Week one, we talked about Jesus being at the core. Ultimately, everything is about him. I mean, he's in the center of it, and everything is surrounded, by him. Last week, we talked about how Jesus allows us to serve, and so we really got to talking about how now we get to be a part of this idea of God's kingdom and building that and what that looks like. And tonight's lesson really goes hand in hand. I told Noah and Betty earlier that I almost kind of wish we would have done tonight's lesson first, but they both really coordinate together really well. And so tonight's point number 3 is that Jesus gives us the gospel. Ultimately, and an application point is the fact that our sole purpose on this earth is to share and live out and experience the gospel. And so without the gospel, we have no purpose. And so we look at, hey, where does that purpose come from? And Jesus is the one that offers that to us. And so tonight's text is going to be from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 27. And what we do, we find ourselves here where Paul is writing a letter to the church at Corinth, really addressing some issues that had come up in their time, where you had people that were not really unified. You had some that thought they were better than others, and none of them could really get on the same page. And so right here in verses 4 through 27, at the heart of Paul's letter, we see that he's really trying to encourage them to recognize the gifts and the talents that God's given them, and then unite together for a sole purpose of living out the gospel and sharing that gospel with others. So we'll get started tonight by really kind of looking at the first part of that, of how we ourselves need to recognize what Paul's saying to that church, and then start applying it to our own life. So then we look at how can we find fulfillment and meaning in being able to play a part in helping build God's kingdom, but also not cross the line to where we're working for God to try to earn his favor in doing what we've been called to do.
Yeah, because for us, it's not like we're not getting paid to do this. We're not being forced to do this. It is literally a privilege. Jesus allows us to serve him and to share the gospel with others. He could have done it on his own, and he can still do it on his own without us, but he wants us to be a part of that.
Yeah, and it's, again, we referenced last week when we talked about getting to serve that it is a privilege. You're right. I mean, that's the mindset that we should have about it, that it's not about us, it's about him, and we should be thankful that it's an honor to get to be a part of it. So in this passage particularly, Paul is, again, he's really sharing these ideas of saying, hey, look, not all of you are equal, and that's okay. But all of you have a very important part to play. All of you have been given different gifts and talents, and through here he gives kind of a limited view of maybe some of what these gifts and talents look like, and so it's not exhaustive by all means. There's a lot of other gifts and talents out there that we have that Paul didn't include, and I don't think he was intending to give just a specific list. I think he was just naming out some of those in general, specifically those that may have been gifted these that thought they were better than other people, and that the other people didn't have a role to play, is why some of these in particular were used. But again, it's this idea of how we've all got our gifts and talents, and so how can we find those gifts and talents, and then how can we start to use those to further God's kingdom?
Yeah, and especially because we all have different gifts and talents, and so with that, your talents may be different from mine, but that doesn't mean that either of our talents are any lesser in furthering the kingdom.
Right. Like you said, our talents are different, but God puts us in the certain situations, in certain places in a church, that your talents help my talents, and my talents help your talents.
Right. Yeah.
To make it go.
Yeah. And we all have different circles of influence. We all have different life experiences. And so all these things and these situations that we found ourselves in that God orchestrates keys us for these gifts and talents, and then specifically in there, Paul says that, they're not all going to be equal, that the Holy Spirit has gifted on these certain amounts based off of what he needs us to do. And so with that, I think about this comment here of how we should be reminded that these gifts and talents are not to serve our own needs, but they're to serve others, and a lot of times, let's be honest, sometimes it's, hey, look what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, hey, it's not about you. And if it's a look what I'm doing, then you're really serving yourself, not serving others, which goes, again, hand in hand with last week's message. And I know a while ago you made the comment about, that song Nobody, and how, to me that really relates if we would remember and have that attitude.
Yeah. Because you think about it, he took 12 nobodies, his 12 disciples, and they talked about sharing his word.
Right.
And he took Moses that had stage fright to go out and speak about him,
Right.
to take his people back home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he sends David to a sword fight with just a couple of rocks and a slingshot. I
know
mean,
I know
that's
it.
weird.
How many times, in life that we feel like we're in this, big battle with very little artillery to be able to use, with different things. And just, again, recognizing that it's not us, and it's not about us. It's all about him and for him. So,
But it also goes back to the armor of God.
yeah,
The gospel is the sword, spirit of the sword.
yeah,
I mean, it all intertwines. It all works to make.
yeah. Again, it's all about him. Really, the whole devotion was talking about when we outfit ourselves with the body, the armor of God, like our entire body. It's all produced from Jesus and what he did, and essentially comes back to the core of it being the gospel. So, and as we look at that, how does that look like together? Paul's talking to the church, and this does reference that, but to us it'd be as a group, too, like how we all have a special part to play in this, and how it all works together. Our devotion really, it gave us an example of how it's almost like a family reunion, where, sometimes, you can't pick your family. It is what it is. And a lot of times somebody's awkwardness, may be actual gift to relate to somebody else. It's like you were talking about a while ago, with Betty's comment there is, what my weakness is may be your strength. And so because of that, we're able to work together hand in hand to accomplish God's purpose. A few years ago, there was this almost accident down in Panama City where there was several swimmers that got caught under this riptide, and they were waiting on a rescue boat, but it was taking a while for that rescue boat to get there. And so all of these bystanders, they decided to interlink arms from the beach all the way out to where these swimmers were. And because of that, they were able to save the swimmers' lives. There was about 8 people, I think, in general that got saved through this. And I thought, man, that's a really good picture, because if you're not willing to do your part, no matter how big or how small it is, if you're not helping interlink that chain, those people couldn't have been rescued,
Yeah.
And then ultimately with us, when we're sharing the gospel and being who God's called us to be as a group, like, we can't really fulfill that purpose to the level that it could be if everybody's not willing to do their part. Again, no matter how big or how small it is.
Right.
Yeah, it's just like in that situation, like what if one person in the middle would have let go of their arm? Those people would have been lost, and lives could have been lost. And it's just like when it comes to the church, if we are not all serving as Christians and as believers together, even if we have some differences, and even though some of us have different gifts that others don't have, if we're not working all together, doing our job to do it, then we're not going to be able to reach people that we would have been able to reach, and that's lives lost for the kingdom.
Yeah, and I think, when you explain it that way, it should elevate our response a little bit. Seriously, it should elevate our response to realize that, no matter what that is, if I'm not doing it, then it could have eternal impact on people's life. And so our encouragement to you guys, man, is to find that. Betty mentioned earlier about, there are spiritual gifts tests out there that you can find to really start to at least help you find out what area in your life that you're gifted in, to at least start that process. And of course, if you've ever got any questions, please find one of us leaders. We definitely would be glad to help you to find out what that is. So, all right, so as we get ready to close our video out, let's go over your review questions that we want you to do on your own. The first one is how do you complicate God's instruction by overthinking or not thinking you can live up to it? How do you guys feel?
On that one, when I got called into the ministry, I was scared. I was like, what if I fail you? What if I not do the right thing?
Right.
And I mean, I was overthinking it.
Yeah, we overthink and we doubt like what all God can do with us because we know that we're humans and we fail, and we only see our failures. We don't see all of the good things that God can do with us.
Yeah, well, I agree. We definitely overthink it. I know I overcomplicate and overthink things way too much. And again, it's really trying to put it into my perspective where, God is so far out there, we got to quit bringing him back to where we're at and just trust and go forward to where he is. So question number 2 is it difficult for you oftentimes to recognize how God has equipped you or gifted you in certain areas?
I know there's definitely times where I forget like that God has equipped me, or like different times where God has like provided for me. Like I'll forget like what he did last week and think, oh, it's a new week, he's not going to do the same thing. But
Right.
God's the same every single week, every single day, no matter what.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you making that comment about that last study series we did on reality and the armor of God, to me that kind of coincides with this, because we've got to be ready for this spiritual battle, because the enemy's going to try to knock you off of where you're at and get you distracted, and that way if he can distract you and get you off your, where you're at, and then all of a sudden now I'm not equipped. No, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden here we go. It can get out of control real quick.
Yeah.
So, all right. Last question is do you struggle with striving to do things for God to gain approval, or maybe to make up for some mistakes? I mean, I know for myself, I can look at certain things and instead of doing it for the right reasons, I can look back and say, yeah, I did that because I'd done something wrong, and now I'm trying to make up for that in my relationship with him.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, guys, thanks for joining us on this video. Again, we encourage you not just listen to the video and go on, but go back, look over your study material, go over these small group questions, even get out your journal and really record some answers down to help you, so you can go back and look at these in the future to remind yourself where you're at and what God's called you to do. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's our application point, is to find these gifts and talents, come together as a group where we can all serve one purpose, and that is to experience the gospel and to serve him by sharing the gospel with other people. So, all right, well, thank you guys, and thank y'all, and we will see you next week. Take care.